Chapter 3. As they proceeded down the dim, deserted corridor, Yuya and Crowley told each other about their respective worlds. Both worlds had schools, and their civilizations appeared to be more or less the same. As a commonality of smartphones demonstrated, science and technology had progressed along similar paths. This world had an extra force, however: magic. Crowley was surprised when Yuya said that there was no magic where he came from. That was the only major difference they discovered so far. Who knew what other things might turn out to be fantastical in his world, but ordinary in this one? He couldn't let his guard down. He had to be ready so that way he wouldn't be surprised no matter what came at him. Hanging his head, he gave a little pep talk to himself and tried to prepare for whatever the future held.
Now then,
Crowley tapped something hard with his cane.
We are about to leave the school building.
Huh? Yuya lifted his face and immediately squeezed his eyes shut at the dazzling glare. He felt a breeze blowing, and a new scent reached his nose, the fragrance of a chilly tide. He gingerly opened his eyes to find the night sky spreading out before him. In the center was the full moon, bright enough that he could see the patterns on the ground. He'd seen the moon through the window before, but looking up at it now, he felt overwhelmed by its vastness. It was so bright that he couldn't see any stars.
Huh?
He frowned. Why would you have an orientation at night?
Because, unlike other schools, we are a prestigious institute for the cultivation of mages,
Crowley declared.
Naturally, we hold our important ceremonies at night.
Makes sense, Yuya replied. Here it was already. The first piece of this world's unexpected common sense. He looked at his feet and the light of the moon reflecting off the gray stone tiles. There was nothing else around them, only the dark sky and the ground shining palely. As they walked, the world suddenly opened up. Yuya caught sight of a long staircase, and at the bottom of it, far below, a variety of structures dotted the landscape. Tall buildings, rigid roofs, domes. He thought the school itself was plenty big, but the overall campus was larger than he had imagined. The windows and the street lamps shone earnestly, undaunted by the light of the moon. Although Yuya couldn't see anything other than the moon in the sky, the tiny flickering lights of the townscape looked like stars, and made it seem like the night sky continued to stretch out beneath itself. It's beautiful, Yuya murmured with emotion as he looked down on the campus from high up.
Isn't it, though?
Crowley puffed his chest up proudly.
All these magnificent structures provide an environment that cultivates a rich and full of humanity in our students.
Is the building I'm staying in down there?
Of course. It is one of the most elegant and refined on campus, with plenty of character. Only a little farther now. Let us hurry along,
Crowley urged. Yuya stepped out onto the first stair and faltered a bit at the height. But his mood was a little brighter now. Perhaps because of the beautiful view. He made his way down the steep staircase with care, mindful of where he set his feet.
And here we are,
Crowley declared with an expansive wave of his arm.
Step through the gate and behold your new lodgings, you.
Cree! There was an ear-splitting metallic shriek in response. This gate? Yuya asked, eyeing the collection of precipitously inclined iron poles dubiously as they swung back and forth in the wind, threatening to snap off at any moment. Crowley was calling this heap of junk a gate. Yuya touched it timidly, and a rusty chunk crumbled and fell to the ground. He slipped through the structure that had once apparently been a gate, being careful not to catch his robe on it, and stepped up onto the gently sloped staircase. Somehow, the surrounding air grew darker and more stagnant with every step he took. The moon that had been so dazzlingly bright when they left the school building was now under a thick blanket of clouds. Weeds grew freely from gaps in the cracked concrete and made the ground beneath his feet even more uncertain. He nearly fell any number of times, propping himself up by clinging to Crowley each time, until they finally arrived at the building itself, a Western-style structure of the sort that didn't exist in an average residential area in Japan. At the very least, Yuya had never seen a house this big in his own neighborhood.
Long, long ago, this was used as a dorm,
Crowley said, his tone wistful, as he looked up at the large door.
It's equipped with all the necessary facilities: lounge, student rooms, bathroom, small kitchen.
It had likely been quite an impressive place in its heyday. The pillars bracing the eaves were reassuringly sturdy, and the heavy door was solidly built. The issue was its age. The gate was in an advanced stage of decay, and the building itself was in terrible shape. The light bulb at the entrance was broken, and the porch was riddled with holes. The window on the door was still intact, but given the general condition of the place, this felt like a minor miracle. The paint was peeling off swollen exterior walls, which rippled in deformed waves. Yuya quickly glanced around the rest of the property. Rain shutters and roof tiles littered the garden, where broken trees had been left to rot. This dorm was basically a haunted house. The key ring at Crowley's waist jangled as he pulled it out and unerringly an unadorned silver key from the dozens of other keys. He inserted this into the lock on the door. Yuya watched as the door still refused to open.
Is this the right key?
This should be it, Crowley frowned.
I suppose the lock's simply gotten a bit stiff because it hadn't been used in quite some time.
It had been so long since anyone had come here that the lock had rusted. Yuya wasn't sure which was worse, sleeping in this place or in a creepy room with all the coffins he had left behind. Just as he was wondering whether he should ask if the latter was still an option, the door was opened with a squealing creak.
Oh, there we are,
Crowley said and stepped inside. Yuya took a deep breath and then followed the headmage. The house stank of mold, like a compressed and compact version of the air found in the farthest reaches of a library. Yuya coughed as he walked down the hallway with Crowley. True to the impression Yuya had gotten from its exterior, the building was quite large inside, but the furniture was scattered all across the hallway, and it was no small bit of work to weave their way around it. While his attention was occupied by where he was stepping, his head collected spider webs. The lounge they eventually arrived at was filled with the same mess of broken furniture.
Isn't it delightful?
Crowley looked back at Yuya with a smile.
I grant you, it is a touch old, but nothing a broom and some elbow grease can't fix. You'll have a ship-shaped place to spend the night in no time.
He righted a candle stand that had fallen on top of the hearth and set a hand over it. The candles immediately sprang to life and set small shadows, maybe spiders, maybe mice, scurrying away. Yuya looked around the room in trepidation.
Well then,
Crowley stamped his cane against the floor,
I'm off to investigate your place of origin in the library.
What? Yuya said. You're leaving?
We must all use our time effectively. I hope at the very least to learn a little something about this world you came from.
Crowley grinned and dipped his head, causing spider webs to catch on his top hat.
I'll no doubt return shortly. Please feel free to make yourself comfortable.
He left Yuya in the lounge and firmly closed the door behind him, bringing down a storm of accumulated dust.
Make myself comfortable, he says,
Yuya muttered under his breath. He was more likely to choke to death on the dust swirling through the air. With a sigh, he set himself to clean the lounge so he could spend the night there. Candle holder in hand, he stepped into the corridor, careful of the warped floorboards under his feet. He tentatively opened a small door at the end of the corridor and found a storeroom, just as he expected. He took an ancient broom from inside and returned to the lounge. He yanked open the windows and began to sweep the floor, pulling up a thick layer of dust like peeling skin. As he coughed and cleaned, he heard a pitter-patter against the wall, a quiet sound that quickly changed into a burbling of water. It's raining, he realized. The gentle rhythm of falling rain steadily increased in volume as the sudden shower turned into a full-blown storm. In the distance, he heard thunder rumbling like the purring of a happy cat. The bright moon, and clear skies of the orientation seemed like a faraway dream now. Or perhaps that had been magic too. He could almost hear Crowley saying, "Naturally, we take measures to ensure that this important ceremony sees a successful conclusion." The air coming through the windows was cooler now, perhaps because of the rain. The long-sleeve robe he was wearing, apparently Night Raven College's ceremonial dress, was perfect for the current temperature. When he heard the word orientation, he assumed it was spring, but it was fall, one of the 4 seasons of this world that matched the world he'd come from. He'd heard that schools overseas started their new year in the fall, and from the style of the buildings he'd seen so far, the structure of this college did seem to be more closely related to schools in Europe or America than in Japan. He crouched down and peered into the large fireplace, wondering if he could maybe light a fire to make the room a little brighter. But there was nothing in it except charred remnants of fires past. He had no idea where to find something he could burn, nor did he have any matches that he could use to actually light a fire. He stood up with a sigh. There was nothing he could do here. What would the others do in this situation? Would they use magic, like Crowley lighting the candles with a wave of his hand? Or Riddle and Grim at the orientation? How had he ended up in such a weird world? I'm all alone. As he stared into the fireless fireplace, Yuya was suddenly overcome with loneliness. What were his parents doing right now? He didn't know what time it was, but he guessed it had been a while since he had woken up in the mirror chamber. His parents would have come home from work by now. Were they worried because he wasn't there? He didn't have any friends here he could lose track of time hanging out with. Once his parents noticed their son hadn't come home yet, they would almost certainly be worried. As he pictured the faces of his loving parents, he had a sudden realization. If he couldn't go back to his original world, he'd never see his mom and dad again. Now, for the first time, his fear took on a definite shape, pressing down on him. He had been entirely preoccupied by one bewildering incident after another, which had been a good thing. It had kept him busy enough that he could allow himself to believe that everything happening to him was part of an extremely weird dream, that this unfamiliar world and its dangerous magic were all someone else's problem. But now that he was alone, he was forced to face it. Would he never see his parents again? What if he had to live here alone in this place where magic actually existed? He felt something hot in the corner of his eyes. Reflexively, he reached up, about to brush away the tears, but then hesitated given how dusty his hands were. He tilted his head back and took a deep breath. He was determined not to cry because he was scared, not at his age. He was embarrassed by his tears, even though there was no one around to see them. It would all be fine. Something would work out. There was nothing to cry about, he told himself, and tried to swallow the sobs that threatened to spill out from him. Then he heard a wet splat. It wasn't the wetness of the tears falling, though. With a gasp, he held up the candle in the direction that the sound came from and saw a wet piece of fabric on the floor beneath the window. It looked like the curtain had ripped right off due to extra weight of the rain soaking in. Everything in this building really was ancient. As Yuya went over to the window to close it, something leaped at his chest out of nowhere. "Wah!" he cried as he fell flat on his backside, and a dazzling blue flame burned before him.
Wah! It's seriously pouring out there,
said a voice. G. Yuya's mouth gaped open and shut. The thing grinned and laughed.
That look on your face is priceless, like a bat that got blasted by a water gun.
Grim? Laughing at him once more was the little creature that had started chasing him the moment he opened his eyes in the mirror chamber. But Grim had been kicked out of the school at orientation. He caused such a ruckus that Yuya assumed the school would have put some kind of measure in place to make sure he couldn't step onto campus again. So how had he gotten in here? Maybe no one thought he would be so persistent. When Yuya looked closely, he saw that Grim was missing the shackle Riddle had locked around his neck. "What are you doing here?" he yelped.
It's obvious, duh.
Grim rolled his eyes.
I'm here to fight you so I can be a student at this college. People keep getting in my way. But this time for sure, you're going down.
Wait! There's no point in fighting me! Yuya stopped Grim with both hands as the creature started to take a deep breath. I'm not a student here! A lick of fire flickered out from between his fangs.
Huh? What do you mean?
Yuya told Grim what had happened after he'd left the mirror chamber.
You mean you can't use magic?
Grim scrutinized him with wide eyes. Exactly.
Whoa. Didn't see that one coming.
Grim shook his head slowly.
Sucks to be you.
You don't have to actually say it, Yuya groaned. The desire to flee that had welled up in him during the orientation was rekindled. He wanted to be anywhere but there. As if to strike the final blow on an increasingly despondent Yuya, Grim let out a huge sigh.
So beating you to a pulp's not going to get me in, huh? Well, guess I better think up another way.
Another way?
Yep.
Grim inched closer.
I take you hostage and threaten the headmage.
Yuya shoved the creature back with the broom. Although Grim seemed to have given up on the idea of fighting, he couldn't let his guard down just yet. Why don't you give up already?
Don't be stupid. I ain't never giving up,
Grim declared, and leaped up onto the back of the sofa. Even in that position, he still wasn't quite at eye level with Yuya. Nevertheless, he began to speak with an overwhelming passion.
I was born to do this. I am a magical prodigy who's got the makings to become one of the greatest mages who have ever lived. Which is why I figured I'd be a shoo-in for the famed Night Raven College. And why I was waiting and waiting for that black carriage to come for me. And yet, it never did.
Grim fell silent, drops of rainwater falling on the tips of his drooping ears. He looked so much like a stuffed animal when he wasn't moving like that. With him soaking wet, hanging his head like this, Yuya almost felt sorry for him. While Yuya struggled with how to respond, Grim suddenly shook himself like a dog and water went flying everywhere.
Harf!
Grim snorted. His brash grin went back to his face.
That dark mirror and the headmage got no eye for talent. I'm totes destined for greatness, to be the most powerful mage ever. Not letting me in is a great loss for this whole wide world. I am going to school here, whatever it takes.
But you don't know exactly what they'll do to you next time, Yuya protested. You're already in so much trouble. Just give it up.
Never. I will be a great mage,
Grim screeched, and it was clear that he would not listen to a word Yuya had to say. Yuya couldn't handle Grim setting everything on fire again, so he held his hands, palms out, placatingly. Okay, fine, I get it. What do you mean by all this great mage stuff anyway?
So, okay, a great mage, right? We're talking the most amazing mage ever,
Grim said. Yuya was pretty sure this was not really an explanation. But Grim ignored his doubtful demeanor and went on, eyes shining brightly as he recounted his dreams to Yuya.
A great mage is super popular and powerful. You want something done? That's the guy you call. When I'm a great mage, everyone will be all like, Grim's so cool, and Grim's so strong, and what a genius Grim is. Total respect.
Wow, sounds amazing. Yuya was only going along with Grim, trying not to stir anything up. But Grim seemed satisfied. He snickered somewhat derisively.
That's the dream, eh? But too bad for you. Can't use magic. So you can't be a great mage, okay? What I'm saying here is, you got no chance, uh-huh?
I'm maybe fine with that, Yuya said.
Liar! Ain't a soul alive who doesn't want to be a great mage.
Grim crossed his arms with a malicious smirk.
No point in pretending you're all tough. I mean, the truth is, you gotta be wishing you could use magic like me.
Yuya pictured it for a moment. What if he could use magic? It would be handy, and probably lots of fun. But that didn't mean he was stewing in his own thwarted ambitions, or feeling panicky. Grim could boast and brag until the sun set, but Yuya didn't feel so much as a twinge of jealousy toward these magic users.
Do you even get it?
Grim stammered.
If you were a powerful mage, you could do anything, everything, with magic.
Magic. A parallel world. Yuya honestly couldn't care less. He only wanted one thing right now, to go back to his own world.
You got some screws loose, buddy.
Grim pursed his lips in a pout and sat on a sofa. Suddenly, he opened his eyes wide.
Whoa, the bottoms of my feet are all white.
Oh wow, they are. Yuya peered at his paw pads, which now looked like bits of cotton. I guess it's because you were walking around this dusty place after getting soaked by the rain. Yuya had only finished cleaning half the floor after all, and hadn't even gotten started on the sofa.
Dust?
Grim looked around like he was only just noticing the state of the room.
Oh yeah, everything here's all whitish, and it stinks like mold. How am I supposed to sleep here? Get cleaning already.
Huh? Yuya wondered whether he heard wrong. Did you just say, sleep?
Yep.
Grim nodded firmly. You're planning on staying here?
You betcha. You seem like a guy who maybe gets it. I won't take you hostage for now, so give me a place to live instead. But Grim,
Yuya protested.
You just got thrown off campus. The headmage is going to be back soon, and honestly, I really don't need any more trouble. You're gonna shoo me out into this rainstorm?
Grim turned incredulous eyes on him.
You're a cold one, dang. So, you're saying you don't care if my fur gets soaking wet, and I catch a cold, and it goes and turns into pneumonia?
I didn't say that. I mean, I didn't, but... Yuya really didn't want to aggravate Grim. But he got the feeling that letting the creature who'd disrupt the orientation so spectacularly stay was only going to be a headache for him. While he struggled to decide what to do, Grim suddenly screeched and leaped up.
Something just fell on my back.
Huh? Was it? Yuya looked up at the ceiling and glimpsed a wet spot. Of course there's a leak. How old is this building?
Meow.
Grim snarled.
Get up there and fix that garbage roof.
Huh? I can't. Yuya stared at him blankly. I have never repaired a roof in my life.
You could just magic those holes. Oh, wait, right. You can't use magic.
Grim burst out laughing.
Man, you're so useless. 'Kay, fine then. Boring guy like you can just go up and get a boring bucket or whatever, can't you?
Yuya turned exasperated eyes on Grim. This creature clearly only cared about himself. Grim rolled around laughing on the sofa and then abruptly stopped. What? More rain? Grim reached out toward Yuya. Are you trying to give me something? He held his own palms out in return, and these were slapped away immediately.
No, you don't,
Grim yelled.
Behind you!
Behind me? Yuya turned around and saw white smoke dripping up the middle of the room. He assumed at first it was another fire, but he couldn't see any flames. Where was the smoke coming from? He cocked his head curiously to one side as he looked down and then up. The white smoke echoed with laughter as a face within the shapeless mist met the astonished Yuya's eyes before it started floating around the room. With shaking hands, Yuya tried to shine a light on it, but the smoke slipped away into the darkness. He peered into the gloom, trying to follow it.
We haven't had visitors in ages,
came a voice. The abrupt words sent shivers up Yuya's spine.
How long has it been anyway?
Lightning flashed outside the windows, and a bolt thundered nearby, as if to further shred the ripped curtain. And for a split second, the dark room was bright as day.
Welcome to our home,
the voice continued as a semi-transparent something floated in midair, smiling creepily as it stretched out its hands.
Ghost,
Yuya yelped. White, floating, and see-through, Yuya and Grim were definitely staring at a ghost.
Stay away from me,
Grim cried, whipping the ghost with its tail. But the white haze only vanished into nothing for a moment before quickly coalescing again into its original form. No matter how hard Grim tried to smack down the ghost, his tail simply passed right through it. Meanwhile, the ghost seemed utterly unfazed by the entire situation.
What in the world? My tail's all tingly.
Grim tucked his tail between his legs and shrank back against Yuya's legs. The ghost giggled gleefully again. Yuya suddenly realized they weren't up against just one ghost. Several pairs of eyes appeared in the air, all of them staring down at him from every direction. "It's always nice to have visitors," one ghost commented. "We get so bored, you know."
"All the people who used to live here got scared of us and ran away,"
noted another.
"Real weird."
Their white bodies had no legs, instead stretching and trailing off into nothing, like a lizard's tail. They bobbed towards Yuya and Grim, gently, but with an air of finality somehow. Yuya felt a powerful chill. As the ghost approached, he felt as if he'd been tossed into a vat of ice water. His legs trembled, his jaws shook, and his teeth chattered. He wondered if the icy tendrils creeping up from his feet would eventually reach his heart. He could see the light of the candle on the table through the bodies of the ghosts. "We just want some new pals to play with," a ghost said as it leaned in, colored red by the flame. And its face was abruptly enormous, lips pulled back into a frightening snarl of a smile. "How about we make you into ghosts?" Maybe it was because his legs were frozen. Or maybe it was the terror. But Yuya couldn't move or scream. He was rooted to the spot. While next to him, Grim's ears twitched. He guessed Grim was probably just as scared as he was, and lowered his gaze. Then nearly did a double take. The look on Grim's face was the exact opposite of what he'd expect. Grim's nose was wrinkled, and his throat rumbled with a low growl. Flames flickered out from between his fangs, and his eyes blazed with outrage. "I ain't afraid of ghosts!" he exclaimed. When the ghost had first appeared, Grim had shrunken up against Yuya in fear. But he had clearly gotten over that initial shock. All his fur was standing on end as he aggressively leaned forward. How could he be so determined even now? Yuya looked on in surprise while Grim stood on all fours and shouted, "I'll show you what I got!" Puan. The area around them grew abruptly brighter. Flames lapped at the floor and walls. It was the orientation all over again. "Ah, don't! You're going to set the place on fire!" Yuya grimaced at the heat and reached out to try and stop Grim, but the creature slipped away, chasing after the circling ghosts, balls of fire flying everywhere. Pop, pop.
"Not even close,"
one ghost taunted.
"Go ahead and fire off your sad little magic until you die. 'Cause we can't, you know. We're already dead and everything."
"Shut up!" The angry Grim kept shooting off fireballs indiscriminately. Pop, pop, pop. Yuya raced around and put out the tiny little fires with his shoes or his hands covered with his sleeve. The rain actually was a blessing, he realized. Because of it, the room was so damp that the flames basically just smoldered when they hit the floor or the furniture. But he could tell that the constant heat of the fire was starting to dry out the dampness. It was only a matter of time before one of those fireballs truly lit something on fire. If he didn't put an end to this, the building really would burn down. "Grim, stop! Stop it! Calm down!" Yuya shouted desperately, but his voice was drowned out by the rain beating against the windows. "Missed by a country mile. Over here. This way," a ghost taunted. "You got a lot of nerve for someone who's see-through. Quit popping up and disappearing already," Grim growled. Yuya's head spun as the ghost roared with laughter. The intensifying thunderstorm only made his panic that much more acute. He was so scared and worried he could hardly stand it, his heart leaping and pounding in his chest. Why did Grim keep missing the ghost anyway? It definitely wasn't because the ghosts were moving too fast. They bobbed toward them and away again, gently drifting around Grim and Yuya as if teasing them. They were moving so slowly that Yuya could probably have tossed a ball and hit one of them. Did the ghost have some kind of special power? He examined them carefully. No, it was Grim. He was closing his eyes every time he let loose a fireball, and there was no way he was going to hit anything firing blindly like that. At last, flames began to eat away at the sofa. "I have to stop this." Yuya clenched his fist in determination and crept toward Grim. The monster was totally focused on the ghost in front of him and had apparently forgotten all about Yuya. Waiting for the moment when the jet of fire streaming from Grimm's fanged mouth broke off, Yuya grabbed Grimm with both hands and lifted him up into the air, and then started running, eyes straight ahead, not looking back. He couldn't dodge the ghost blocking his way forward, so he slipped right through its white body. He reflexively screamed at the sudden chill that wrapped around him, which felt like standing in front of an open refrigerator door. Stumbling forward, he managed to escape into the hallway, slamming the lounge door shut so hard it threatened to break.
That was too freaky,
he said as he slumped down onto the floor in front of the door, the nervous tension draining from his body all at once. Grimm was frozen in his arms, perhaps still processing his sudden abduction. But then, he let out a gasp of realization and glared up at Yuya, demanding,
"What are you doing, you jerk? I had everything under control."
"You nearly burned the whole building down," Yuya snapped in reply.
"Fine,"
Grimm sniffed.
"Fine. Then you deal with them."
Yuya shook his head back and forth so hard it nearly flew off its neck. "I can't."
"Oh, what? You little scaredy cat?"
Grimm sneered. "It's just, I've never been in a fight before."
"Shut it then. I don't need any lip from a useless human."
"Sorry." Grimm was painfully correct. There was nothing Yuya could do except apologize. But he gave up now. The best case scenario was that they ended up pals with the ghosts. Worst case was the same, except with extra suffering as they were burnt alive along with the building. "Listen." Yuya worked hard to keep his voice even. "I was watching you in there. You kept closing your eyes when you were using your magic, And I just kind of feel like it's going to be maybe hard to hit anything like that."
"Huh?"
Grimm cocked his head to one side, pursed his lips, and mimicked himself shooting fire. And apparently noticed for the first time that he indeed have such a habit.
"Well, I can't help it. When I go ooh with my mouth, my eyes go nyeh,"
he said, showing Yuya his technique. This seemed pretty clumsy to Yuya, not like being able to walk and chew gum at the same time, but maybe he was in no position to talk. While running toward the ghost, he had been so scared he squeezed his own eyes shut. Perhaps, deep down, Grimm was scared too, he realized. Grimm had the courage to face the ghost all alone, though. Unlike Yuya, who had simply frozen in place. Couldn't Yuya at least help him? After considering it for a minute, he had a flash of insight and looked down at Grimm on his lap. "I got it. There's an easy fix here. I'll tell you where the ghosts are, like right, left, up, that kind of thing. Then you shoot fire in that direction. That way, your magic might hit them."
"Huh? And why should I take orders from you?"
Grimm said, insulted, and began to flail against Yuya. He was clearly raring to charge back into the lounge and start firing again. "Wait!" Yuya squeezed Grimm tightly to hold him in place. "Just listen to me."
"Nope,"
Grimm said, still squirming.
"You think you're all hot stuff when you didn't even do a single thing in there."
"I'm sorry," Yuya said again, "but if you don't—"
"Are you about done here?"
came a bright voice abruptly from above his head, and he nearly replied to it automatically. He managed to hold his tongue and ever so timidly looked up. A ghost's torso was poking through the closed door.
"Wah! A ghost!"
Yuya exclaimed. When the ghost slipped through the wall, Yuya and Grimm leaped backward. The ghost gave them a once-over.
"Sorry to bug ya in the middle of your chit-chat,"
one said.
"We just got sick of waiting is all."
The end of Yuya's nose grew cold. The ghosts were almost on top of them.
"Get away from us!"
he cried.
"Stay back!"
Grimm yelled. Yuya thrust his hands out at the ghosts, and Grimm breathed fire, lost in the moment.
"Oh, it burns!"
a ghost yelped. The ghosts were on fire. Actually, they were less on fire and more riddled with holes where the fire had shot through them. Just like a shadow disappears when its owner steps out into the light, the bodies of the ghosts disappeared under the bright gleam of the flames. Grimm had finally made a hit.
"Piece of cake,"
Grimm said, looking at the panicking ghost.
"Hey, human, point me toward a ghost."
You got it," Yuya said as he picked the creature up again and carefully aimed him at a ghost. Now! The world before him flashed with a pale light.
Gah!
Another ghost was knocked flying by Grimm's blast.
Heh! Got one! I knew I was a total whiz with magic,
Grimm said as he looked back at Yuya and grinned.
Keep him coming, human.
Roger, Yuya said. Though Grimm had objected to Yuya's earlier suggestion of telling him which way to aim, they were essentially doing that now. But they were moving together rather than Grimm obeying Yuya's orders, which seemingly made this arrangement more acceptable to Grimm. In fact, he seemed to be having fun as he let his fire fly. Yuya supported him with both arms, as if he were gripping a hose with water turned on all the way, and together they dispersed the ghosts.
I am the greatest,
Grimm crowed.
You're heavy.
Yuya's hands were already slipping from the weight of the creature that was much bigger and heavier than the average house cat, and the recoil from every fireball nearly knocked him over backward.
Quit your belly aching,
Grimm said merrily, and whapped his arms. He was in high spirits now that he had gotten himself the perfect vehicle. When the flames hit the ghosts, instead of spreading, they quickly fizzled out like they'd been doused with water. All around them, Yuya could hear the hiss of ghosts disappearing.
Eee!
A ghost wailed.
No fair gaining up on us. Shut up!
Grimm snarled.
There are way more of you!
One ghost after another fled through the wall. Yuya chased them to the lounge and surveyed every nook and cranny of the room, holding Grimm at the ready. A chorus of ghost voices sounded. Whoa! They're going to disappear us for good.
Retreat! Fall back! We gotta get out of here!
Before Yuya knew it, the laughter and the screams had stopped, and the only sound in the lounge was his and Grimm's panting. The storm outside had also faded into a gentle rainfall. The flying herd of ghosts was nowhere to be seen, and the room was in more or less good shape. It did smell a little charred, but otherwise it was the same dark and damp lounge. Grimm leaped out of Yuya's arms. As he landed, he put his hands on his hips and threw his head back proudly.
How'd you like that? I totally smashed those ghosts.
That was amazing, Grimm, Yuya agreed.
Yeah.
A surprised look flashed upon Grimm's face, and he averted his eyes, flustered. He had been so confident and so full of pride, and yet when someone actually paid him a compliment, he seemed oddly flabbergasted. Yuya had to smile at the situation.
Hee,
Grimm chuckled.
You were maybe all right yourself.
His grin was as malicious as ever, but Yuya wasn't frightened by it the way he had been the first time he'd seen it. What disaster has befallen this place? Came a loud cry from behind them, sending a jolt through both Yuya and Grimm. They looked back in trepidation and found not a ghost in the doorway, but the headmage Crowley. Thank goodness it's you, Yuya exclaimed. He was about to explain what had happened when something shot out in front of him.
This again?
Grimm snarled. When Yuya looked down, Grimm was tied up with the headmage's tough love. I heard screams as I was returning, Crowley said, lifting Grimm with one hand. So, it was this creature again. Quite the stubborn little beast, I suppose he was getting up to mischief here too. He looked ready to throw Grimm through the window, so Yuya hurriedly grabbed his arm. No, that's not it. I was attacked by ghosts, and Grimm saved me. Crowley frowned. What do you mean? So, earlier, Yuya began to explain about Grimm coming in through the window, the ghost attacking, and the two of them working together to chase the ghost away. I see. The headmage nodded. Then the screams I heard were those of the ghosts?
Exactly. I'm innocent, I tells ya.
Grimm thrashed around, held by the scruff of his neck. Now that you mention it, Crowley mused, I do seem to recall that some mischievous ghost took up residence in this dorm and scared away all the students. I'd completely forgotten why it was abandoned. And you were going to make me spend the night in a haunted dorm? You forgot it was haunted. What if I had actually been turned into a ghost? What would you have done then? Yuya put this question to him in gentler terms, and Crowley laughed. Absurd. That was merely an old ghost joke. He looked thoughtfully down at Grim hanging from his hand. But to think that this one here would assist anyone! You've done well to tame such a ferocious monster.
Excuse me? Tame?
Grim snorted derisively.
This kid was a total waste of skin, but I managed to make him useful.
There, you see? Crowley gestured toward the angry Grim. Very defiant. You have a remarkable skills to be able to bend one like this to your will. Yuya mustered up the courage to ask what he really wanted to know. Headmage? He began. Yes? Crowley looked up at him. So, Yuya mumbled. Are you finished with your research in the library? All expression disappeared abruptly from the headmage's face. He tilted his head slightly to one side and nodded slowly. He appeared to be choosing his words carefully. I am indeed finished. I did not contain my search to the library, but rather availed myself of every method I could think of. Asking other teachers, looking online, all of that. Yuya silently urged him to continue. But, despite my best efforts, I could find no trace of this Japan that you spoke of, Crowley told him. It has never existed anywhere in Twisted Wonderland, at any point in recorded history. So, that's it then, Yuya sighed. Yes, you have indeed come from a different world, but the confounding factor here is the total lack of information. In the 100 years that I have been headmage, I can safely say that I have been witness to a great many surprises, but I have never encountered anything like this, and without any precedents, I could not find a way to return you to your original world. You couldn't? Even said so bluntly, it didn't feel real. Yuya had been so scared by the prospect of being trapped there that he had nearly bursted into tears. And yet, when he was told that this was effectively the position he was in, he couldn't quite believe it. Deep down, he had assumed that this would all work out somehow, convinced that something so cruel could never happen to someone so utterly average as him. But he was wrong. No one knew how to get him home. If there was some way to do it, it was not going to be easy to figure out. How was he supposed to keep going now? What was there to live for when he woke up in the morning? Crowley lowered Grim to the floor and cleared his throat. Yuya automatically shuddered. Well, this is difficult to say, Crowley began. But given that you are not a student at our fine college, I cannot allow you to stay here for free. Education must be fair above all else. Okay. Yuya could only hang his head at this. However, Crowley paused thoughtfully, I believe accommodations might be made if you would consider working for me. Huh? Yuya's face shot up, and he stared at the headmage. Except for the faculty, everyone employed at the college is a ghost. But a staff of ghosts is not always optimal, you see. Crowley's eyes shone. It was hard to tell because of the mask he was wearing, but his mouth was curling up slightly in what appeared to be a smile. It would truly pain me, as an educator, to abandon a boy without a penny to his name. I would personally find it a great help if you were to do odd jobs on campus, while I attempt to find a way to return you to your original world. As for pay, well, that would be an amount commensurate with the work performed. He smiled. What do you think? Yuya wanted to hug him. He'd be able to keep going on for now, at least. Crowley was giving him a roof over his head and food on his table, not to mention a purpose. I think that sounds great, he said. Thank you so much. In his great relief, the tears he'd held back earlier rolled down his cheeks. Dear me, Crowley laughed. Well, my charity knows no bounds. Oh, there's just one condition. Sure, Yuya nodded. What is it? You must attend to Grim, he stated firmly. Huh? Grim? He pointed automatically at the disgruntled monster, and Grim's ears twitched.
What? Me?
Yes, Crowley replied. Given that you are unable to use magic, I am somewhat concerned about leaving you alone on campus, But with Grim by your side, you should be able to handle anything that might come up. Monster and magic-free alien, it's the best the two of you join forces. And from what I can see, you've already gotten quite friendly. But Yuya protested, but Crowley cut him off. He is unusually persistent, you see. Who knows what he'll get up to if he's left to his own devices. But I know I won't have anything to worry about if you're with him, you. Crowley was trying to get rid of a nuisance by making Grim Yuya's responsibility. He was about to insist that he really wouldn't be able to rein Grim in when the monster in question shoved him out of the way.
So, I could go to school here?
Grim shouted with delight. No, Crowley said in a clipped tone. I told you. You will stay on at the school to do odd jobs, cleaning the campus and maintaining the facilities. You will not be a student.
Cleaning?
Grim was obviously unhappy with this.
What kind of deal is that? I'm going to look so stupid. I don't want to sweep up people's junk.
How shameless of you!
The headmage cried angrily. The winds were suddenly blowing in a dangerous direction. Crowley looked as though he might take back his offer at any second. Yuya yanked Grim in a panic and whispered in his large ears, Quit it! If you keep this up, he'll throw you out again, okay?
But I don't want to be a janitor,
Grim whined. Yuya could only stay there on a condition that Grim stayed with him. Living with this selfish creature was bound to be rough, but it had to be better than being shut out in the cold. And Crowley was right. Yuya would be happy to have the help of someone who could use magic. He crouched down so he was at eye level with Grim. The monster was clearly dissatisfied with the special requirement, but this made Yuya feel like he could count on him somehow. I just know the headmage will let you in at some point if you stick with me, he said, desperately trying to persuade Grim that this was in both of their best interests. I mean, he's got you, right? Grim grunted as he looked away and crossed his arms. And if you get thrown out again, I know you'll sneak right back in, yeah? Yuya continued. So living here with me saves you a whole lot of work. They'll feed you, and you won't have to wander around in the rain anymore.
Feed us?
Grim turned and met his eyes.
You mean I can have a can of tuna whenever I want?
Yes, exactly. He bobbed his head up and down. Tuna was Grim's thing. Yuya could probably make that happen. Perhaps Yuya's pleas had struck a chord, or maybe Grim realized that the arrangement was to his advantage. He put his hands on his hips and said,
Fine. I will deign to live here with you. And I'll work. For now, anyway.
Wonderful. It's a done deal, then.
Crowley nodded, having watched over the proceedings.
Once you finish with your official duties, you may, of course, make use of the library and the other facilities as you please. I've no doubt that you would like to do some research yourself, Yuya. You may also use this dorm however you like.
Great, thanks, Yuya said. Crowley took a silver key from the bundle on his key ring. Yuya recognized it as the key to this building from the glimpse he had gotten when they had first arrived at the dorm. It was a simple old thing, but it was scratch-free and gleaming brightly, as if someone had taken good care of it. Yuya clenched it tightly in his fist. Thank you so much for this opportunity, he said, shaking Crowley's hand with his free hand and letting out a sigh of relief. He wouldn't have to worry about how he'd get by while he figured out where to go from here. He and Crowley grinned at each other, while at their feet, Grim tapped his claws loudly against a white bag Crowley was carrying.
This is smelling real good,
Grim remarked.
Ah, so you've noticed,
Crowley exclaimed, delighted.
There's a pot of soup in there. You are hungry, aren't you?
So it is food.
Grim leaped forward.
No.
Crowley yanked the bag up and handed it to Yuya.
You'll share it nicely, and you'll do the same tomorrow as well. Starting now, the two of you are one.
Now that Crowley had mentioned it, Yuya was very hungry. He hadn't had anything to eat since his lunch at school, and he had no idea how long ago that had been. His stomach was growling.
Take this as well, you.
Crowley held out a soft package, and Yuya took it in his arms. What is it? He asked.
Pet clothes and a school uniform for you to wear tomorrow. You'd no doubt have quite the time trying to get anything done wearing our ceremonial robes. Oh, how truly thoughtful I am.
Yuya was concerned about being in uniform when he wasn't even a student, but Crowley had told him that they had plenty to spare, so he accepted it. Tentatively opening the package, he glimpsed a black jacket and a white shirt.
There's actually a vest to complete the set, Crowley told him. but those are distributed by the dorms. You should be fine with just that.
Yes, of course, Yuya said. Thank you so much.
Proof of my tremendous generosity. Eat and get yourself right to bed. I'll need you to work those fingers to the bone starting tomorrow.
Crowley patted Yuya's shoulder gently and left. Crowley had an oddly attached air despite his exaggerated expressions of delight, surprise, and sadness. He was a strange person, but he was also the only person Yuya could count on at the moment, as he had given him food and a place to live. Though he seemed a bit half-baked, perhaps he really was just as kind and benevolent as he repeatedly insisted he was. Yuya had no choice but to have faith in that.
Hey!
Grim said. Yuya looked away from the door Crowley had disappeared through and back at Grim. What? At some point, the monster had gotten up on the table so that he was basically at eye level with Yuya.
What's your name anyway?
Yuya realized he hadn't introduced himself yet. Yuya Kuroki.
Yuya?
Grim frowned.
That's a tough one. I'm just going to call you you. Rejoice, you. Super genius and future amazing mage Grimm's decided to make you his henchman.
He thrusted his chest out in show of extreme confidence. The white fur there was fluffy and looked soft to the touch. He seemed so pleased with himself that Yuya couldn't bring himself to be annoyed at this absurd declaration and simply laughed instead. Grim was selfish and reckless, but he was also forthright. Yuya felt like he was right to rely on this little monster and his magic ability. It emboldened him somehow, and he suspected his new roommate would be coming to his rescue again and again. Thanks. He extended a handshake just as he had with Crowley. When he gripped Grim's small paw, the tips of sharp claws grazed his palm. He started a little bit, but they didn't scratch him, and the soft paw pads felt nice in his hand.
Yeah-ha!
Grim flashed his teeth.
Okay then, hand over the grub this second.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.